Well, we are on Joseph, part 3. I'm going to give a very quick recap, maybe for some of you who were not here beforehand. But Joseph, we read about him in Genesis, right? And specifically Genesis 37, we see the beginning of his story taking place. And just running through that very quick to catch you up to where we are here. So Joseph is his father's favorite. His father loves him. His brothers hate him. His brothers beat him up. They throw him into a cave. Then they sell him into slavery. He gets pulled all the way there to Egypt. As a slave, he gets bought by a man named Potiphar, who's the chief executioner, which means he's over all the prisons there in Egypt under Pharaoh. And he's his slave. Potiphar loves him, sees favor with him, so Joseph becomes the head over all of his servants and his household. But then Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph. Joseph denies her. She makes a lie about him, accuses him that he tried to sleep with her, and then Joseph gets thrown back into a cave, into jail, which would have been underground. He gets thrown back there, and that's where we start off here in Genesis 40. If you have your Bible here and you turn to that, you'll see that the title says, The Cupbearer and the Baker. Now, many of us, maybe if you've grown up in church, you've heard this story a lot, and even if you haven't, you might have heard it in some literature or something you studied, but we're going to unpack it a little bit deeper than maybe just even the surface reading of what takes place there in Genesis 40. So, at the end of Genesis 39, Joseph is in prison. This man has walked through some pretty hard times, right? He's been just cheated out of life, basically. Sold into slavery, and then all of a sudden falsely accused. And now he's thrown back into a jail. He's at the bottom again. He went from daddy's favorite down, Potiphar's favorite, now down again. In a jail, in a cell. And these jails weren't very nice. They weren't what even we see today in jails. They were intense. They were like caves. They were musty. They were wet. A lot of diseases, a lot of sicknesses. So Joseph finds himself there. But even in the midst of this place, God has such favor and a call upon Joseph's life that it says the warden of the jail saw that Joseph was a good man, saw how he had such favor, and what he did was made him over the jail. Basically what he was is he wasn't the warden. Sometimes people say, oh, is he over the jail now? No, what that meant was he was still just as much a prisoner, but the warden used him to serve and to help the other prisoners that were there. So even in the midst there of the jail, Joseph still has such favor from God right on his life. Then moving forward, we see he's in there for a period of time, and all of a sudden, Pharaoh decides that he was very angry with his cupbearer, chief cupbearer, and also chief butler is what you could refer to him as, and chief baker. Now, sometimes we say baker. What does that mean? Did he just make cookies and cakes? No. He was the cook. All right, he was the cook, but they worked a lot with bread then, so we translate into baker, but he was the cook. Pharaoh gets furious with them. Now, many speculate the reason he got furious with these gentlemen were because there was some speculation that he was trying to be poisoned. And so they were going to try to poison him through either his wine, his drink, or his food. You know, sometimes we hear the story and we think maybe he just had like a bad meal. He's like, that's it, I'm throwing you to prison, right? Or this drink is horrible. And he throws it like the movie Thor. Have you guys ever seen the movie Thor, right? You know, when he like throws down his drink, but he wants another. Okay, I did that at home. Anna's like, what are you doing? You broke one of our nice glasses. Now clean it up. Okay, you're manly, great, clean it up and go get it. So it's because he thought, there's speculation that someone was trying to poison him. So he throws his chief butler and his chief cook down into this dungeon, into this prison. But these men weren't just cooks or chefs or just a butler like, oh, this guy just carries around drinks. No, most likely they were very educated. And in the Egyptian hierarchy system, they were high up there. They were an official of Egypt. The butler was over all of the wine and the vineyards of the kingdom, and the cook was over everything that happened of making food in the palace for Pharaoh, and probably even extending over certain things that would take place in Egypt in that matter. So these were important guys. So Joseph, over a period of time, he's having to serve and take care of them. So he's starting to take care of them. And we see this unfold in Genesis 40, right? Joseph comes in one day, And he says this specifically, and I want to read it with you right here. So I've been excited to use this Bible. I just got a new Bible. Very excited about it. I have an obsession with like Bibles, books, and journals. My journals are blank. No, they're not blank, but I just have them there. So Joseph comes to the chief butler and the chief cook, and he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" So he asked them, "Man, why do you look so sad today?" And this is what they say to him. They say, "Well, it's crazy. We had a dream. We both had dreams." Now, we might say, "Oh man, you had a dream. What does that mean?" Well, listen, in Egyptian culture, dreams were something that were very important. Dreams were very important. Actually, people would have dreams, and out of interpretations, they would actually even come up, it's historically recorded that there would be scientific methods that would come out of that. So someone had a dream, someone interpreted it, and then they made it almost like a rule of science. Okay, so dreams were extremely important at this time. So the baker and the butler, they both have dreams, and they're upset about it because no one's there to interpret it. Now, most likely, because they're down in a dungeon, really forgotten by Pharaoh, there was no one there to interpret it. But Joseph looks at them and he says this, only God can interpret dreams. And then he says, "Can I hear them?" So, first the butler shares his dream with him. And you can have a chance, you could read it there in the scripture, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move past it and tell you what Joseph says is an interpretation of it. But you can read it there, and it's kind of funny. It's figurative, and it's about these branches and all this. And so Joseph says, "All right, listen, I've heard your dream. This is the interpretation of it. All right, this is the interpretation of the dream. In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to call for you, and you'll be reinstated as your job as the butler." Whew, that's good news. So the baker's like, I kind of see this picture in this dungeon. It's a little wet. It's musty. Butler just shares his story. The baker's kind of like sitting in the corner, just scratching his belly. Listen to this. He's like, "Oh, that's good news. Ooh, that was a good interpretation. Joseph, let me tell you my dream. Tell me the good news and interpretation of my dream." So the baker shares his story, his dream with Joseph. And Joseph says, and we don't see anything like Joseph with remorse says. No, he says, in 3 days, the Pharaoh will call you out. He will chop off your head and he will hang you. And you'll be dead, obviously. That's horrible news. That's horrible news. You just heard this guy. You'll be reinstated. Pharaoh will call you out. He's like, "Joseph, tell me mine." You will be beheaded, and some translations even say impaled. So they say he was either hung, his carcass was hung, or he was impaled. And that's what he tells the baker. Sure enough, 3 days later, Pharaoh's having his birthday, his celebration. He calls both the baker and the cupbearer to him. And what Joseph interpreted through God came true. The baker was killed. He was beheaded, and then he was hung. But the cupbearer was reinstated to his position. Now, during this time, after Joseph interprets the cupbearer's dream, he says to him, please, don't forget me. And then he goes further. He says, I don't deserve to be in this dungeon. I'm an innocent man. Please don't forget me. But it says in verse 23, chapter 40, the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So as we look at this passage and this story, this glimpse, the snapshot of Joseph's life, there's some things we can walk away with. See, what do we do in the midst of pain? Pastor Stephen, what are you talking about? Well, in the midst of pain, are we others-focused or are we self-focused? Because Joseph has walked through some pretty intense and hard times in his life. Wouldn't you say that? Beat up by the men, the brothers who are closest to you, sold into slavery by them, not just beat up, not even killed. The fact that they would sell him into slavery for the rest of their lives knowing he's there suffering. It's pretty painful. Then he goes, and a man he respects and looks up to finds favor with him, Potiphar, has to throw him into jail because he was falsely accused. He's thrown in the jail, and now he's in a dungeon. Do you think he could have pain? Do you think he could be bitter? Of course he could. And of course he was in pain. But even in the midst of it, he is serving others around him, but also he asks when he sees them, the cupbearer, and he sees the baker in pain and hurt. He says, why are you sad? Why are you sad? See, I think many times in our lives, when we're in pain, when we're experiencing something hard, we get very self-focused, right? We become very self-centered. And we can almost ignore the other things that are around us or not see them, but we almost feel like we have the right to. We're walking around just, so sad. Something bad happened. It could even be something just so cheesy and corny, like I stubbed my toe really hard. Has anyone ever stubbed their toe very hard? I'm not talking about like, ooh, I stubbed my toe, but literally where you can't speak for like 5 seconds. You're like, and you don't know why. It's like, what's happening? What's wrong? I stubbed my toe. It's like, come on. And it's everyone's like, oh, you stubbed your toe, big deal. But when it happens to you, you're like, oh my gosh, I stubbed my toe. It's horrible. I can't walk. I need a break. Okay, but we walk around when bad things happen in our life. And listen, bad things happen everywhere. We walk around kind of just depressed and sad. Our pity party. People say, are you having a pity party? Joseph could have walked around with a pity party, big time. A lot more than we could. But even in the midst of his pain, he looked and he saw others that were hurting, and he asked them, how can I help you? Why are you sad? See, we need to start doing that more in our lives. Pain's not an excuse. I'm not saying that I don't have sympathy, but I am saying this. In our lives, when we experience pain and hard times, something beautiful we can do by the grace of God is that we can reach out and we can still look at others and help them, reach out to them, love them, just like Joseph did here. There's a quote I want to read to you. One by Augustine, who's an early church father, great theologian, shaped a lot of the theology and beliefs we have here through the Bible, interpretation of the Bible. But then also Michael Jordan, MJ. Polar opposites in the spectrum, right? We had basketball the other night. We play on every other Thursday night. We just have a bunch of basketball here. So if anyone didn't know about that, now you do. March 7th is our next night here. But MJ, right? Everyone wants to be like Michael Jordan. Whether you don't like him or not, like whatever it is, you still respect him. Like that guy was a baller, right? Okay. Is he cocky? Yes. We're going to read a quote. I won't even get into this yet. Hold on. So first we're going to read about Augustine. Now listen to what he says. What does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten the poor and needy. It has the eyes to see misery and want. It has the ears to hear the sighs and sorrows of men. That is what love looks like. Now here's Michael Jordan. Man, I loved Michael Jordan growing up. I had probably 8 posters in a very tiny bedroom of mine. It was like wallpaper of just Michael. And in one poster, there's like 8 shots of him hovering in the air, staring at the camera perfectly, like 8 feet up high. Oh my goodness, amazing. I thought I was going to like reach a peak in my height. I kept asking my doctor, my pediatrician. I was young, probably 12 years old. How tall would I be? And he's like, oh, 12 years old, you're going to be 6'2". I'm like, oh yeah, 6'2", baby. And it's like 13 or 14. I'm like, so how tall am I going to be? He's like, oh, you're going to be 6 foot probably. You could probably make it. This man is lying to me. Dr. Wong. So literally then I hit like 16. I'm like, how tall am I going to be? He's like, I don't think you're getting any taller. And here I stand before you today. I just kept measuring it by if I just get this many more inches, I'll be able to dunk. Never did. One day, maybe our kids. It's my hope. They will be basketball players. Okay, so Michael Jordan says this. I love him, and I did love him, I should say. I really did as a kid. Man, I looked up to him, but when I saw later in his life kind of hurt me now to see kind of the pride he had that I couldn't even see past. He was very self-centered. And in this, you'll see the quote. He says, to be successful, you have to be selfish, or else you never achieve. And once you get to your highest level, then you have to be unselfish. Stay reachable. Stay in touch. Don't dissolve. Man. Listen, be selfish till you get success. Then when you're successful, you can be unselfish. What a lie. What a false belief, because the truth of the matter is that when you're not successful, as the world would say, and you're selfish, you'll still be selfish even when you're successful. You'll still be focused on yourself because it'll never be good enough, right? It'll never be enough. Man, what does the world define as success is so different than what God does. To really look and to really understand that we need to be people who are unselfish, even in the midst of our pain. That doesn't take away the realization of what we're going through and walking through, but hear this. If I see you in pain and I know I'm in pain and I reach out to touch your life, then healthy Christianity and what God wants us to do is that person is also being unselfish and reaching out and touching your life. See, that's what marriage is. Two imperfect people coming together but striving to be like Christ and also being selfless. And in that, a beautiful balance takes place where we pour into others' lives and they pour into ours. So when I hear that quote and I see what Augustine says, and then I see what Michael Jordan says in that, there's a big difference on what success is. Because success, as he says, that Augustine right here is saying that we love unselfishly. Unselfishly, we love. We reach out. We touch people. We see their hurt. We love them in that place. Prime example of that is Jesus Christ. Walking through pain and suffering. Easter's coming up soon, Good Friday, the night in which Jesus was crucified, he died. Man, in the midst of that moment, one of my favorite stories is when he's on the cross. He's been whipped, he's been hurt, worse than we could ever imagine. It says he was unrecognizable. He's hung on that cross, he's dying, nailed. He is a thief to his right and to his left. One that is mocking him, ridiculing him along with the crowds around. But another one that says, Jesus, remember me. You know what he does in the midst of his pain, Jesus? His suffering, his last dying breath? He gives that man life. He says, truly, you will be with me in paradise today. He was others focused, even in his last dying breath. I think we really need to realize that. And we need to be like that. Be like Christ, yeah. Truly someone who is unselfish, even in his last breath. Now, there's another thing I want to break down in there, because I find it really interesting when Joseph tells the cupbearer some very great news. He tells the baker some very bad news. That's the worst news you can get. Not like, oh, this bad thing will happen to you, but you'll survive. No, you will die in 3 days. But see, I see something called obedience. Joseph was obedient to God as he interpreted that dream. See, obedience is thinking less about what that person is going to think and how they're going to understand who you are. And it's more of saying, the one who told me, I care about what he thinks, who he sees me as. See, that's what Joseph did there. So Joseph gave truth over what? Momentary satisfaction. He gave truth over momentary satisfaction. To be like, I love you, man. That's what the butler said, right? Thanks for that. That's awesome. The cook, you're going to die. Whoa. But he gave the truth. So in our lives, we talked about this last week. We talked about conviction, standing for your conviction, being strong in it. But you know what? Sometimes we need to realize we have to be obedient to Christ and to God and to his truth. And sometimes that means it might not be pleasing to others. But when God speaks something to us, we need to fight, we need to stand for truth. See, I never saw that when I looked at the story of Joseph. I never realized that. That's difficult. But he's obedient to God because that's his number one priority. And that's a hard thing to swallow, I know that. But let us practice that in our life. Start with the little things and move on even to the bigger things in our lives to really stand for God's truth, no matter what the outcome might seem, and even over that momentary satisfaction for ourselves or for others if we don't say the full truth. Because actually, it is because of Joseph being obedient to God and saying exactly what would take place that in the future, he actually gets out of prison and becomes a powerful man in Egypt. We're not there yet, though. See, Jesus gave hard messages. He did. John 3:16, that was a great message. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. All of John 3 talking about God's grace, his love. But then we also see Luke 13. Jesus talks about those that aren't righteous in him, who God turns away and is thrown to gnashing, weeping. Oh, man. It's both messages, but both so true. So that's the little insert there to say, stand for the truth of God in your life, no matter what the outcome might look like. But lastly, and this is something, this really touched, my heart when I was preparing. We often forget, and I see that with the butler. They say that most likely the butler, the baker, and Joseph were in jail together for maybe around a year. 1 year. Can you build pretty good friendships in a year? Anyone? Yeah? Me and Matt Pisani celebrated our 1 year friendship anniversary today, actually. We shared tacos at the Baja Grill. Matt? So these guys, every day, they're in jail, they're not going anywhere, and Joseph's there taking care of them. There had to be some sort of friendship that took place between all of them. Or at least they knew each other, and they knew each other well. Then 3 days before that butler gets out, Joseph gives him a word that says, you'll be free, and this is what will take place. And he asks him, please don't forget me. Please don't forget me. And 3 days later, this happens. It happens. He's freed. Exactly what Joseph said. But then in verse 23, we see it, that the butler forgot Joseph. Forgot about him. You know what? I see that sometimes in our relationship with God. In the midst of the pain and the sorrow that butler was experiencing, man, he was buddy-buddy probably with Joseph. They were hanging out. They were with one another. They knew each other. But suddenly, once that pain, that suffering, that hard time, that trial was over, and he was back reinstated as the butler, as a chief within Pharaoh's home, he didn't know Joseph anymore. Many times in our lives, you know what happens? In trials, in tribulations, in pain, and in suffering, man, we're tight with God. We need him. We have to know him. He has to be by us. But then when things kind of get back into their groove again, we don't have as much pain and that trial's over. We kind of leave him in that dungeon, that hard place of our life. And we move on. We step out. We don't need him as much anymore. We don't know him as deeply anymore. Now listen, the reason I said this meant a lot to me when I was preparing is because it struck me in my heart. It convicted me in my own life. Now, I'm not going against trials and tribulations. They draw us closer to God, and he uses them in our lives. But what we have to remember is that this is a journey with Jesus. It's a pilgrimage of perseverance. There'll be valleys and there'll be mountains. And if only in those hard times that we stay close to God and we keep him that close to us, but then when everything's good and dandy, we kind of forget about him, like that cupbearer. We walk out of that dungeon. Life is normal again. We leave God back there. My challenge tonight to all of you, wherever you're at in your life, whatever place you're at, keep him close and keep him near. Because when you do, you'll discover the strength in that. True strength. That outside of those trials and those tribulations and those difficult times, even when life is really good, you keep him close to you. That's a relationship. Some of you might have had relationships and friendships that only when the times are hard, that person calls you. When life is really bad and they feel really low, they call you up to go out and eat, and you have to pay for them. Right? We've had those. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you just grow callous to it and you say, well, I accept this is how it is. Let's not do that to Jesus, though. Let's not do that to Jesus. That in the pains and the sufferings that we would keep him close, but in the good times, we would keep him close as well. That's relationship. That's true relationship. That's why in the Bible they use the example of marriage to show Christ's love for us. Because in my marriage with Anna, if just when times are hard, I'm close to her and with her, but when things are great, I'm separated, that would be such a dysfunctional marriage. Any marriage counselor would look and say, that's horrible. How much deeper, though, that we're called to be even closer and more intimate with Christ than even our own spouse. How much more should we do that in our lives? And so that's my challenge. That's my challenge to all of us today. Can we keep Jesus close to us? Let's not forget about him. Let's not leave him in that dungeon. So as we stand up now, and we're going to worship, I want you to keep that focus. Maybe you're in pain right now. Maybe times are really hard. Well, I challenge you tonight to not look at yourself, but to look at others and look for a way that you could love on someone else. Look for a way that you could help someone else. You could reach out to them in their pain and their hurt. Watch what the Lord does. Watch what he does in your life. Because sometimes that reach out leaves room for God to reach in and really touch your life. Maybe you're sitting out there and you're like, you know what? I haven't fought for truth too much. I've kind of cared a little bit about what people think. Or if in some moments my conviction will be offensive. Or I won't say what I feel God wants me to say that lines up with his word because I might not be that happy for that other person. Stand for the truth. There's fulfillment in that. And last, don't forget God. Times might be good for you. Life might be real sweet. Bring him close. Don't just wait when you fall down and times get rough. Keep him close to your heart. It'll be a beautiful journey and pilgrimage with him throughout your life if you make that something you fight for in every season of life. So let's stand together. Let's just worship the Lord at this time and just remembering what he's done for us, right? And that he's with us.